I feel like being obnoxious today, folks, so you've been warned. Fast forward 30 seconds if you don't want to hear it. That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you. And we are back for another Bears Banter. We have plenty to discuss as the Bears are just about done with the offseason program. Optional OTAs are this week, but really, for the most part, that's mostly rookies. The Minicamp really kind of wrapped up a lot of these OTAs and, of course, the mandatory Minicamp. We are going to have Herb Howard from the Bigs on in just a little bit to talk about. He was at pretty much every one of these practices that the media was allowed at, so we will get some information from Herb as terms of what he saw, what was interesting, what was not interesting, where there's positives, negatives. We'll get it all from Herb. He's going to be by here in just a little bit, but just want to kind of talk about this Bears team and where everything is right now. Just a few things. I don't think this monologue will be too long. I know some of you really love it when I go for 25, 30 minutes. I don't think we're going to be hitting that long, but let's dive in here. Let's talk about a few things, and let's start with the Ben Johnson practices. I think from everything that I have seen, the one thing, if you were just going to say, what is one thing that you say is the Ben Johnson thing in practices? Is it intensity? Is it, whatever it might be? Ben Johnson, it's attention to detail. That's really what I see with these practices, is that he is not letting things slide. Like those players, they wanted accountability last year. They got it. So I want to ask Herb about that, especially because the attention to detail here, these players, if you don't know your playbook inside and out, if you don't know what your task is, what your job is, what your role is on every play, depending on what the defense does in this situation, what the defense does in that situation, if Caleb calls this change, what that means for your job. If you don't know every facet of your job, I don't care who you are, I don't think you're going to see the field, or you're going to see a reduced role if you're not doing the right things. I think Ben Johnson is got a little psychosis in that area, and I mean that in the absolute most complimentary way, the exact kind of way that NFL coaches do need. To me, this is very Bill Belichick in the attention to detail. And again, that is a positive. I'm not talking about Bill Belichick and where we are now with Jordan Hudson. No, I'm talking about Bill Belichick circa like 2009, when this guy knew the NFL rule book better than the officials, and he found ways to exploit it to his advantages. He found multiple ways. His players knew exactly what they needed to do in every situation. And his players, he had so much attention to detail that his players were always more prepared than the opponents. And that goes a long freaking way. And I really feel like that foundation is here with Ben Johnson. Obviously, there's a long way to go here. I am not sitting here calling Ben Johnson Bill Belichick. I'm saying the approach to details seems very similar, and that's a big positive for me. So, early on, we've seen that this offense has been struggling. That's okay. August 1st, I don't want to hear that this offense is still really struggling, because at that point, you're going to be sitting there going, things really need to start clicking soon. They're going to have a couple weeks, 10 days, whatever it is in July before, they really going to get close to that first preseason game. So I'm not panicked at all about the issues the offense may have had. It did seem to be getting better the last couple days of minicamp. We'll ask Herb, obviously, about that arc as well. But, from what it seems to me is they're letting Caleb be Caleb, but at the same time, they're really drilling in him the things that he needs to do, timing on short routes and things like that, for this offense to go where Caleb needs to, make the read, get the ball out quickly, not even have the defense a chance to get any pressure in the backfield, sack him, flush him out, whatever it might be. There's going to be a lot of quick hitters. Obviously, we saw Ben Johnson do that a lot in Detroit. There's no reason to think that's going to change. He's going to obviously tailor things for Caleb Williams differently than he did for Jared Goff, but a lot of the core of the offense obviously is still going to remain the same. So I'm not worried about the slow development of the offense, especially when you hear about all the attention to detail type things that they're doing. They're making sure everybody knows everything about their jobs. And that's the thing. If you're not going in there and going, oh, well, they know 75%, that's pretty good. They'll figure the rest 25% out before training camp. If you're like, no, I want 100% on this right now, we're not taking a C. We're only taking A's and A pluses. That's going to take longer for the offense to figure everything out. I don't think this is a very, this is a complicated offense. There's a lot of different facets, a lot of different, looks and things like that. So it's going to take a little while, I think, for the offense to come together. But let's talk about this offense beyond Caleb Williams and talk about where this offense is, where my concerns still remain, and then we'll get to Herb here in a little bit. Defensively, really quick, there's not too much for me on the defensive side of the ball. I'm curious who the third linebacker in base packages is going to be. I'm curious if that's going to be Noah Sewell. I'm curious if Ruben Hippolyte is going to have that. I'll ask Herb about that. I also am curious about the defensive line because, I thought at first that Shamar Turner was going to be out on the edge, but he's going to be on the interior. So their interior is looking really good, but that edge depth looks pretty weak. Austin Booker, maybe he can be the third edge. If he's not ready for that position, maybe that's something where they need to bring in a veteran presence, something like that to kind of work through that edge situation, because obviously they got Dio, they got Montez, and then it's Austin Booker and not much else there. Just leave me with the Dom Rob stuff. I'm not interested in Dominique Robinson. I don't think he's a player. He's literally had one good game. His first game against San Francisco in the rain. Every game since, he's been terrible that he's played. So I'm not interested. I don't see it there. Yes, he's athletic and everything, but I just don't think when the pads come on that it matters much for Dominique Robinson. I just don't think he fits in the Bears' long-term plans. I don't even think he's going to be on the 53-man roster this year. So defensively, I'm more interested to get to training camp and kind of see what Dennis Allen's doing once we get to preseason and his new looks there. But offensively, there's so many question marks. And let me talk about the three that stand out the most to me. And obviously, I'm going to get Herb's opinions on this as well. Two are on the offensive line. One is in the backfield. On the offensive line, the first one is left tackle. How is this going to play out? I think tie goes to Ozzie Trapillo. I think they want Ozzie Trapillo to be the starting left tackle this year, get him as much time to develop at that position. That's where they want to see him grow. He's a big guy. He's got really boring tape, which is a really positive thing. He just goes out there, does his job. He's not going to be a guy that's going to Tevin Jenkins, you get under a guy's pads, drive him back 10 yards and pancake him. He's going to hold his block. He's going to put that guy where he needs to be, but he's not going to overpower him. But at the same time, he's also not going to get beat frequently on passing downs either. He's going to keep his body on his guy, keep his guy out of the backfield. Like I said, just really boring. Just does his job, does it well, doesn't do anything spectacularly good, but doesn't do anything spectacularly bad either. So I think overall, they're going to get exactly what they want from Ozzie Trapillo. If he's ready to start week one, I think he starts week one. Karan Amagaji, and I understand you can't get too much with no pads on, but talking to people and what I've seen, Karan Amagaji's still struggling over at left tackle. Not what you want to see at this point from your second-year player. Yes, last year, and I said it all season, needed to be a red shirt, and then you needed to see where he was this year. Obviously, that was proven in December with that horrible game against the Vikings. But at the same time, I'm going to sit there and be like, that December game is the only measuring stick we have at Karan Amagaji. And there were not a lot of positives there. There were a lot of negatives. And then when you hear that he's coming out here and also looking flat in OTAs and in minicamp, to me, we're starting to point to Karan Amagaji is not a guy. That's where that's starting to point. Again, we're not panicking. We're not giving up on him. We're just saying that the arrow is pointing down on Karan Amagaji right now. And I think you just have to accept it. It's a third-round tackle. It was very hit or miss if he was ever going to develop into that. Now, can he go inside? Is that maybe where he can end up? Because to me, that gets to the second part, the interior offensive line depth. We'll get to that in a second when I wrap up left tackle here, because to me, Amagaji cannot be your swing tackle. All right. Where he is in December, what we're hearing about him now, September 1st, between now and September 1st, I don't think you can get Amagaji to a point where you're comfortable with him as your swing tackle. The reason I bring that up, because if Trapillo wins the starting job and Amagaji is your swing, that means you've traded Braxton Jones, which, look, I'm struggling with my opinion on what to do with Braxton Jones if he is not the Bears starting left tackle. If he wins the job, if he's clearly better than Trapillo and it's his job, Trapillo backs him up as left tackle, Amagaji becomes your fourth tackle, kind of makes all sense. Like, okay, you're fine there. Everything makes sense. But if Trapillo takes the job, what do you do with Braxton Jones? Because Braxton Jones is an average left tackle. He's not spectacular, but he's not bad. And teams will pay for an average left tackle. But what kind of money is Braxton Jones going to get if he lost his starting job and has been a swing tackle for this entire year? He's not going to get that Tennessee Dan Moore money, right? He's not going to see that 4-year, $80 million deal. At least I don't think so. I could be wrong. I don't think Braxton's going to get that kind of contract after being a backup to a rookie for an entire season. People are going to be like, well, maybe he's not as good as we thought. We can't risk that kind of contract. He may get, 2 years, 25 million, something like that, with 13, 14 million guaranteed. I could see something like that, but, and obviously that would factor into the comp pick formula a little bit. But I don't think he's going to get a huge 20, 21, $22 million a year contract, which if he played at left tackle all year and then left, and plays at the level he's been playing at, that's probably what he is going to receive. But do you want to lose a whole year of Ozzie Trapillo losing some development? And he wouldn't be, if you play Jones and not Trapillo this year and you let Jones walk, which I would assume would be the plan, then Trapillo is not quite as good in 2026 as he would have been if he was getting reps all during 2025. So then obviously you could trade Braxton Jones. If you don't think he's going to factor in and get you like that third round comp pick, you could trade Braxton Jones if you think a team will give you maybe a fourth round pick for Jones to go be their starting left tackle for a season. That would be interesting to me. But at the same time, I sit there and I just told you, I'm not comfortable with Karan Amagaji being the swing tackle. Can they get a cheap veteran off the free agent pile who's better than Amagaji? I don't know. So I haven't quite flushed out my opinion here as to what the Bears need to do at the left tackle position. I'd like to see Trapillo win it because I think that's the best thing for the Bears long term at the offensive line position. But at the same time, then I just don't know what the depth is behind them, because I think if you keep Braxton Jones to make sure you have the depth, you're going to crush him in the comp pick formula for next year, which I get it. You can't just sit there and make a decision based on comp pick formula. That's not what I'm suggesting. But at the same time, if you do trade Jones, because you're like, we can get a third round pick for this guy if we trade him to Team X, who desperately needs a left tackle, that's a hard thing to pass up. And then you don't have your depth at tackle. So it's a tricky situation. We're going to have to see how things play out here throughout July and August before we can really make a determination as what the best path moving forward is at left tackle. But that does bring me to interior offensive line depth, which I have significant concerns about. Now, I love what they did across the interior with Tooney, Dahlman, and Jackson. You have to love that. And again, you can love guys, not like guys, but you have to love the effort to improve this. Now, they're spending a lot of money on that interior. And like I said, I'm not the biggest Jonah Jackson guy. We'll see if he can rebound and be where he was a few years ago with Ben Johnson in Detroit. But we'll see about that. Drew Dahlman, I don't love, but I still recognize that Drew Dahlman's still one of the better centers in the league. And I'm glad they finally upgraded that position and made an investment in that position rather than just leave it for whatever happens with Coleman Shelton and Ryan Bates kind of nonsense that we've done. But that aside, Behind them is where my concern is. My concern is behind them where there's just nothing. I like Bill Murray. He's a nice developmental guard. But can you really trust Bill Murray to be your main interior depth piece? I don't know. Ryan Bates, I don't know. Is he ever going to play again? I don't know what's going on with Ryan Bates. I've heard some wild rumors about what he's been trying to do to get back on the field. Nothing bad, but some wild stuff there. We'll see if Ryan Bates can even be relied upon, if he's even going to be a part of this team. And if you can't, like, who else do they have? Doug Kramer proved last year he is not an NFL caliber offensive lineman. I like Ricky Stromberg, but that's a giant question mark. Who do they have across the interior? I know they got Luke Newman, but at the same time, that's just, I don't know. I don't think it's there. I know they're going to try and make him a center. I don't have it there in terms of him being a guy that you can rely on. So with the issues there, I have a lot of concern across the interior of that offensive line. So maybe that's where Amagaji can get bumped inside. Maybe he can have more success there because they certainly need some help in their depth of the interior. And that brings us to running back and what will shake out there. Roshan Johnson and Monangai, they're going to be battling for that kind of that RB2 role, and DeAndre Swift appears to have the RB1 role. But again, I still go back to Ben Johnson relationship with DeAndre Swift in Detroit and what exactly was going on there, because DeAndre Swift was RB1 till Ben Johnson took over and he moved down to RB2. And Jamal Williams, not David Montgomery, not Jahmyr Gibbs, Jamal Williams, Mr. 450, 500 yards a year, took over and ran for over 1,000 yards and 16, 17 touchdowns because he didn't want DeAndre Swift to be his RB1 there. Now, again, DeAndre Swift's a different player. It's been a couple of years. Ben Johnson has grown as a play caller. Maybe they can find a common ground and he can be the running back. But I still think you have to wonder if this team eventually will want to bring in another running back. I don't know if they will. There's not a lot of choices. In fact, in terms of the free, Dobbins doesn't seem to be an option. Maybe he ends up with the Broncos, but Nick Chubb's now with the Texans. Kenneth Walker to me is the guy who seems to have fallen out of favor in Seattle that you could go out and get, but you would have to give up something. You'd have to trade, I don't know, a conditional six-round pick, something like that. That's what the Bears got for Jordan Howard when they traded him to Philadelphia. Maybe a similar trade there. But I just don't know what they're going to do at running back. Maybe this is just they wanted to upgrade the room. They couldn't upgrade the room for a variety of reasons, whether there wasn't money in the free agency budget, things didn't work out in the draft, whether they were how serious they were to trade up for Travion Henderson, whatever it might be. The running back room, they may just be like, this is just what it's going to have to be this year, and we'll see what it's like, what we can do in 2026. That may be what the plan is, but it'll be curious to see what happens, because if he doesn't like Swift, can Roshan Johnson have a Jamal Williams type year running in between the tackles? I don't know. Maybe he showed more promise in year one than he did in year two, but year two, the entire offense was a disaster. So we'll see what happens here. A lot of question marks across with running back to me, but at the same time, it may just be, this is what the room is, and they're just going to have to figure things out. So we're going to ask Herb Howard all these things about the offense, about the defense, about the outlook of the team moving forward. It's an exciting year with Ben Johnson in year one and Caleb Williams in year two. We'll be back with Herb Howard in a minute. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. Welcome back into the podcast. Looking forward to speaking with this guest. He's been on this podcast once before. He is always opinionated, always knowledgeable. He is the beat reporter, Chicago Bears beat reporter for the Bigs. He is Herb Howard, and he joins me now. Herb, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
Bill, thanks for having me, man. I'm feeling good. How are you?
I'm doing very good. And look, a lot of Bears fans are doing very good. They've been very excited this entire offseason, obviously starting with Ben Johnson in January and several things moving forward. So I want to have you on here and kind of talk about OTAs and minicamp and observations and where you think this team is at. Obviously, several months until first week against the Vikings there in September, but fans are hungry for information. So let's not bury the lead. Let's just start right at the top there with Ben Johnson. What did you see with him? And we'll compare him to Matt Eberflus since that was the most recent head coach. What did you see with him in terms of how practices were operated and what his kind of goals were in minicamp compared to the previous regime?
Yeah, I think that was the most important thing too, just to see how Coach Johnson would come in, how he would begin to implement, his systems, but also his process. How does he run a practice? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And I thought it was really, really good in terms of what it looked like and what it felt like. The players had all positive reviews for, how he was going about the practice, how he was going about, harping on the details and holding guys accountable. We know that was a huge thing all last season about lack of accountability from the coaches in terms of getting on guys when they don't do things the proper way. That does not seem like that's going to be the case under Coach Johnson. It seems like every single thing that is missed will be addressed. If you're talking about getting in and out of the huddle the right way, that is going to be addressed. He will send them right back into the huddle to do it again until he feels like it sounds and looks the right way for them to break the huddle. Otherwise, he doesn't think they're ready for business, as he said, and he sends them back in the huddle. If they line up the wrong way, he'll send them back in the huddle. If they're, just a little bit off of their landmarks, we'll do it again. And so I think those are the types of things that are important to see right now. We knew that he would come in, and he was a guy who had a great offensive system, and he was this offensive genius and great play caller. But how does he manage a full roster? How does he go about coaching up 53 men in the locker room? And how does he handle that on the field? Those were things that I was most interested in seeing. And just, from observing from the sidelines, watching him during the practice, albeit, it's OTAs, it's minicamp, it's shorts and t-shirts, but just the way he went about his business and the coaching staff that he's surrounded himself with also going about business in the same way. I thought that was very, very positive.
Yeah, and because I think that was the big question mark, right? When he was hired back in January, the thing the media loves to throw out there is he a leader of men? Sure. That's the one, and everyone's like, oh, well, Johnson, he's a great coordinator. He's a math nerd. He loves, cooking up new plays, but can he lead a locker room? And I kind of think it was interesting in kind of a fun, playful way, but also you love to see it. When he was first introduced, he's wearing the sport coat and the tie and the hair's perfectly combed and moosed or whatever it was. And he's looking good. And then as this off season has progressed, the hair starts getting a little disheveled. He's starting getting a little bit of a mean mug there as he's answering questions. It's kind of like a mad scientist in a good way. And that attention to detail feels very like Belichickian. And I mean that in the most positive of ways, where we hear about, Matt Nagy was a player's coach and Matt Eberflus was a player's coach, although, a lot of question marks about that last year. But sure, this seems to be wildly different. We heard DJ Moore and some players after Eberflus was fired saying they wanted accountability, and it certainly looks like they have it.
Yeah, you start to want to know, does he look like a football coach? Say what you want about Coach Belichick. He looks like a football coach. If you've never met the man in your life, you'd be like, you coach football, don't you? Like, he just kind of has that kind of look to him. And like you said, Coach Johnson, introductory press conference, you come in, you dress the part a certain way, doesn't necessarily look like a football coach. But I'll tell you what, he spoke like a football coach, even during his introductory press conference. It was nice to see some of the veterans were there. DJ, Caleb, Cole, they all came out for his introductory press conference. And he looked those guys right in the eye and said, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because I am going to push you. The standard is going to be high, and I'm going to require you guys to meet that standard every single day. And so, he said the right things, and then you first had the first opportunity as we went through this process to start to see that. And I think that's what has everybody feeling good. The Bears have made, the right moves. I don't think this is going to be a situation, Bill, where you can look back, several months from now and say, oh, they made the wrong decision here and the wrong decision there. Now, maybe these things don't work out. I'm not psychic. I'm not saying all these things are going to work out, but as you look back at the moves that they made with Grady Jarrett, with Joe Tooney, the interior of the offensive line as a whole, bringing in Coach Johnson first and foremost, those all were the right moves. And so you got to feel good about that. And then as it starts to come together throughout the process, you start to see some validation or confirmation for what you thought you would get in terms of Coach Johnson. Because you're right, there was the question about the leadership and leading men and, full roster and all those types of things. Can he do that? He's got this, computer science background, and the man's got everything you need. He's confident, he's stern, he's fair, he seems likable. He seems a little bit honest and transparent in terms of how he goes about addressing things in the media. Sometimes the coaches, how they are. They get unnecessarily protective, and they start to hide things that don't need to be, hidden as much. They're talking about a throw in minicamp from Caleb Williams. It's like, well, no, he was just late. He's got to get back over there sooner. And that's fine. It's refreshing to hear from a head coach. And so I think he's passed everything that we've had to see in terms of the eye test, how he handles himself at the podium, and how he deals with his players. I think he's done all of that with flying colors.
That's great to hear. So, well, we're talking about Ben. Let's talk about how the offenses look, because obviously that's where I think Bears fans are most interested right now, and obviously that's going to be adjacent to Caleb Williams and how he's looked. So, what have you seen from this offense? We've heard a lot of reports that the defense is definitely ahead of the offense. Offense has had a little more issues. Heard some more positives kind of towards the end of mandatory minicamp. But what did you see from this offense over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I saw some of the same things. I think it's to be expected that the defense is a little bit ahead of the offense right now, even though they're both learning new systems. On defense, guys know where they are. They know where they're playing. You're the corner, you're the safety, you're the linebacker, that type of thing. Whereas with an offense, when you're building it from scratch, you're still moving guys around. You're still trying to figure out who's going to be here, who's going to be there in the slot, who's going to be left tackle. Those types of things are still happening and developing for this offense. And they're also, learning a new system. And they've had some guys banged up. Their first 2 draft picks haven't had a chance to get out there with the veterans yet. And so I think the offense is certainly still coming together. But I think that what you can see right now is just this sense of guys really trying to get a feel for what this system is, but also having the coaches that are going to walk them through this at every single position. Antoine Randall, Coach Eric Bieniemy, Coach John, like they're all in lockstep for how they want to do these things. You're seeing some different kinds of drills. I remember watching Coach Bieniemy lead the running backs through a pass pro drill where they were using a soccer ball on the football field, and he would just roll it out at them, and they would come up, and then they would sit down in the chair to pick up the ball like you would to sit down for pass pro and throw the ball back. So you're seeing some of those different things. I think it's coming together well. It is a little bit behind right now, but as minicamp went on, as we got from voluntary OTAs to mandatory minicamp, you kind of got to see the offense start to hit its stride just a little bit. They were able to put together some late game 2-minute situation drives against the first team defense, against the second team defense, drive down and get touchdowns, get field goals, and so they're starting to get a better feel for what it is the system is asking of them individually and collectively. And I think as they go on into the summer, training camp comes on, the offensive line is also at a disadvantage when there's no pads. So you're seeing some guys make some rushes that, is Dominic Robinson really going to beat Darnell Wright with the level of consistency in the summer that he did in the spring? I don't really think so. And so those types of things you got to factor in as well. But I think they're starting to get a grasp for what Coach Johnson is asking for them, starting to get more comfortable in their positions.
And what about Caleb Williams specifically? I mean, we've heard some of the things about some of the throws he had on the run and some of the, Caleb Williams-esque plays he's had. But at the same time, we heard even that 94-yard drive that Jonathan Owens had a couple opportunities for interceptions that he didn't come down with. So how has Caleb Williams looked? And is there anything you've noticed the coaching staff specifically working with him on to try and improve for the 2025 campaign?
Just some tweaks to his game, right? We can talk about, left foot up, those types of things, some tweaks to that. But I think just looking at Caleb's overall game, he's got all the tools, right? So he can make all those plays when, things break down. He can get outside the pocket. He can roll to his left and drop a dime to his right. He's able to do those types of things. But what I'm looking for, and I'll be most, observant of this as training camp comes around, is can he get through this system efficiently, right? Can he break the huddle, get guys lined up, don't have the play clock get too low down unless you really want to run it down, right? Can we get in and out of the huddle, get up to the line of scrimmage, get everybody set, get the ball snapped, and then go through our progressions? Can we get our pre-snaps reads matched up with our post-snap reads, find the answers, and get the ball out quickly, right? It's cool that he can run around and do those things. That's fine. But more often than not, you want him to get to the top of his drop, hitch, get the ball out. And that's when I'll know, hey, he's really getting this thing together. They're not there yet as a whole. So he's not there yet either. So you're still seeing him hold the ball a little bit, even in 7-on-7. It's like 7-on-7, we want to be able to get the ball out. And so you're still seeing some times where maybe that could have been a sack, or maybe he didn't really get the ball out and he's scrambling on 7-on-7. So you're still seeing some of those things, but you're also seeing some of the progressions, right? I referenced that Coach Johnson said he got to the running back late, but that was coming across his entire progression, and he did get there, right? So now you want to work on speeding that up a little bit. What things should he be looking for to kind of expedite that process for how he can get from 1 to 3 if need be? And so I think those are the things you're kind of seeing them right now. Just kind of work through that process. It doesn't look great right now, but it doesn't look bad. I'm not discouraged by anything that I've seen so far. I think Caleb will be able to grasp this offense. I think it's going to be quarterback friendly. And I also think that Coach Johnson is going to understand what Caleb's comfortable with, put him in the situations to do that. And then from there, they can kind of build. And so maybe they start at, 100 level, 200 level, and then we'll see if by week 8, week 12, how long does it take them to get to 300, 400 level stuff in Coach Johnson's offense?
All right, well, let me ask you some specifics about some of the position groups on offense. Let's start with the offensive line. And like you said, there's not a ton you can garner from OTAs and minicamp when the pads aren't on with offensive linemen, but to the best of your ability. Obviously, 4 of those positions are pretty set. Left tackle is the position that everyone wants to know about. Of course, Braxton Jones still on the shelf here, recovering from injury. A lot of things I was reading there was that Trapillo looked better than Amagaji. Obviously, a lot of fans are concerned about Karan Amagaji and that appearance he had in December against the Vikings, but at the same time, you heard a lot of other people, it's tough to judge him on that. That was a bad situation to put him in, etc. So where are you at with the left tackle position with those 2 guys and moving forward with Braxton Jones, if you have any idea how you think that might shake out?
Yeah, so I think, they've certainly been rotating. One day, Amagaji's with the ones, the next day Trapillo's with the ones, and I think that's just how it's been kind of going. Like you said, it's tough to evaluate, when you talk about offensive line play, but what you're looking for is consistency. Are they making the mistakes? What are the coaches saying to them, after the play in terms of, technique, hand placement, kick step, those types of things. And I think from Trapillo specifically, he's been very, very consistent. I think they're very, very pleased with him. He is a large human being, and he stands out even amongst other large human beings. And so I think ideally they would like him to kind of take this thing and run with it, right? And he's going to get an opportunity to do that because Braxton Jones isn't going to be healthy at the start of camp by most reports. And so that's going to give him a little bit of a runway to see, can he do this thing? And I think if he can go out there and consistently show, and I would put Montez Sweat over him as often as I could, just to find out what this kid is capable of. Can he deal with the other team's best pass rusher on a consistent basis? Can he get used to working next to Joe Thuney, who should help him out a ton just in terms of expediting the mental process for what it's going to take for him to play the position, but also giving him the help physically when he needs it. And so I think if he can continue to progress, I think he's a very, very smart player, very cerebral in terms of football knowledge. And if he's going to attack these off time, these 6 weeks, and really be in the playbook and come back still in shape, still feeling healthy and strong, but also having a better understanding of what they're asking him to do, I would say he's probably going to be the leader in the clubhouse. Now, I would also say that Braxton Jones has been your starting left tackle for 3 years, right? And I wouldn't just throw that away. I don't think Ryan Poles is interested in throwing away, good, serviceable offensive linemen. Is Braxton Jones ever going to be an all-pro? Probably not. Could Ozzie Trapillo develop into that? I have no idea, right? But I don't think he's going to be too quick to just dismiss the fact that Braxton Jones should have something to say in this competition. But again, it's going to depend on how early Ozzie can kind of grasp it and get out and take a lead. And I think then that'll leave Amagaji in a bit of a position, right? Obviously, you're talking about Braxton Jones last year, so they wouldn't just get rid of Karan, but then maybe he becomes a factor in some of the interior situation, right? You look at the top 3, we know who those guys are going to be in the interior, but then what does it look like behind them when you talk about guys like Doug Kramer, right? Like, can he get into that mix with some of those guys? And if he can, then that may be a place for him to fit until he becomes the swing tackle maybe next year, and we'll get a chance to see what Trapillo does. But I'm just mostly interested to see when the pads come on and how he does consistently against the Bears' #1 pass rush. And if he can hold up there, I'll feel pretty good about him going into the preseason.
All right, let me ask you a philosophical one about the left tackle position. I mean, if Braxton Jones wins this job in camp, I think, it shakes out pretty obviously with Trapillo and Amagaji behind him. But if, let's just, for argument's sake, say Trapillo does earn the starting left tackle position, I'm not necessarily saying, like, what do you think the Bears would do? What do you think, what is Herb Howard's opinion on what they should do with Braxton Jones? Do you keep him, in essence, make him the swing tackle and see what he can get in the open market next year? Maybe it factors into a comp pick situation with, how thin tackle is across the league. Do you look to maybe trade him this year? What do you think is the best move moving forward with Braxton Jones if he is not the starting left tackle come week 1?
I keep him. I really do. I keep him unless somebody wants to, throw you a 7th or something forward. Like, I would keep him because you got a veteran swing tackle who can come in and play average to slightly above average ball for you at left tackle. He becomes a swing tackle that you can also maybe put in at right tackle. And I think that's invaluable. We don't know what Karan Amagaji is at this level yet because we didn't get a chance to see that last year. He missed the entire offseason, so you don't want to hold it against the kid. You talked about him being thrown to the Wolves in Minnesota. That was dangerous, right? That was dangerous for him. It was very dangerous for Caleb. It reminded me of when the Bears threw Justin Fields in there to Cleveland that third game after he didn't get many reps, coming into the season. And so that was tough on the kid. I thought he had a little bit of improvement when he went out to Washington and played a little bit better there. So, but we still don't know what he is. And so I wouldn't, leave him as the guy who's one play away from then protecting Caleb's blind side or trying to come in and figure out the right side either. Or maybe you move Ozzie over if that happens, but then you're moving a lot of things around. I would just feel much more comfortable having a guy like Braxton Jones as the swing tackle. He's on the last year of a rookie deal. It's not going to cost you a ton of money. I would keep him. And then, he walks out and finds his market value, as a free agent next year. But I would be more inclined to keep him than to say, cut him and try to figure out if there's some money to be saved there.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let me ask you about the interior offensive line. Not so much the starting. We know what's going on there, but the depth, because, now I've criticized Ryan Poles for plenty over the years, but the one thing I was really positive about is last year, I thought he created some really good depth along the offensive line in the interior. And that depth kind of saved that line from being a complete and total dumpster fire. Because when Nate Davis didn't work out, when Ryan Bates couldn't stay healthy, you had Matt Pryor and Coleman Shelton to come in and give you decent reps there. So right now, with those guys gone, and you mentioned Doug Kramer and Bill Murray's back, who everyone liked in his one appearance with Carolina, but there's not a lot of experience there. There is not a lot here. Ryan Bates, I don't know if he's getting on the field anytime soon. There's a lot of question marks behind. I know they spend a lot on these three guys in front of them, but while Tooney's an Iron Man, he is in his early 30s at this point. Drew Dahlman does regularly miss games. Jonah Jackson's coming off injury situations as well. If these guys miss some time up front, there's not a lot behind them right now. What do you make of the interior depth?
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern. I think they'll have to try to figure that out as they go through the preseason, through training camp, and try to figure out if these guys are going to be ready to play. They've spent a 6th-round pick to get an interior lineman out of Michigan State in this year's draft. You talked about, Bill Murray, and we talked Doug Kramer. I think Ryan Bates is a huge X factor, but I don't think he's going to be on the field. We know Ryan Poles has really, really liked him for years now. Finally got a chance to get him over here, and he couldn't stay on the field then. So I think he's going to have a hard time getting on the field. I certainly wouldn't be banking on that. That would be a nice situation. That would be a nice depth piece to have, if he was able to go. But I don't bank on it. I think they're going to have to try and figure this thing out as they go through training camp and on into the preseason. I think these guys will get a lot of reps, together. And individually, some of them will get some snaps in with the ones here and there throughout training camp, just to see who amongst them do you feel good about as your interior swing guy. Can any one of them play all three, right? Can one of them play both guard? Can they play both guard positions? Because you're going to have a guy coming into game day that says, okay, we feel good about him at right and left guard. Maybe we feel good about him at center as well. And then that'll kind of help you out as you kind of go through the process. But I'm with you, Bill. I don't feel great about any of it. I think they have some pieces that they're intrigued by and they want to see how they develop going through the process. But right now, I think they're going to have to figure that out on the fly. I don't think you can look at it right now and say, well, we feel great about, 4, 5, and 6 on the interior of our offensive line. But I think that's probably par for the course. I don't think there's just not a ton of guys in the world that are that size, that move that well. And so no team really has, 5, 6 good interior offensive linemen. You hope you can feel good about your 3 and then maybe have another guy that says, oh, yeah, if he can come in and play, we're okay with that. But once you get, to that 5th guy, it's like, I think it'll be sketchy for most teams, but I think the Bears are intrigued by some of the pieces they have. They'll have to prove it as they go through training camp in the preseason.
All right, I got to ask you about running back, because that's one that I think a lot of people had a lot of question marks about, myself included, because I think the DeAndre Swift situation is interesting with how his relationship, was in Detroit with Ben Johnson, that when Ben took over play calling duties, his role was reduced for Jamal Williams. So now we see he comes back here. He's RB1, at least presumably, with Ben Johnson. You got the rookie in Monanga, you got Roshan Johnson there. What have you seen from this running back room? And do you think this running back room is something that Ben Johnson can be comfortable with in year one? Or perhaps would they go out and try and get a Kenneth Walker or someone like that?
It's interesting, man. I think the answer is yes and no, because we know, and I don't mean to be that way, but we know that they try to go out and add to that room. We know that. We know they flirted with the idea of moving up for even Ashton Genty. We know they were looking at the 2 Ohio State kids in the 2nd round. All those things broke down right in front of them. And so they accepted the board as what it was. and now they're in the position that they are. They got a running back, Kyle Monangai, in the 7th round. I think they actually feel decent about. I think they feel like he can be that guy that can run between the tackles, get you 4 yards when you need it. He's durable, he's reliable, never fumbled the ball in college. So I think they feel okay about that. I know they felt really good about Roschon Johnson coming into last year, and then the production just wasn't there. The feel wasn't there in terms of, what they felt about him before. And so they're hoping he can get back to that form where they feel pretty good about having Roschon Johnson in the mix. I think it's more likely than not that the group of guys we're looking at right now is the group of guys they're going to go into the season with. Now, injury changes that, of course, but I think right now they feel good enough about the room. I think they feel good enough about Coach Johnson and good enough about Coach Bieniemy that they can elevate kind of the group that they have. And I do too, right? I'm not a guy who's as down on DeAndre Swift as some people were. I think you look at the team last year and everybody talks about the dysfunction and the offensive line, and they kind of use that relative to evaluating Caleb Williams, but nobody does that with DeAndre Swift. It's like he was supposed to be running behind a different offensive line than Caleb was playing behind. It's not. He was a part of the same dysfunction that everybody else was dealing with. DJ's numbers were down. Cole's numbers were down. Like everybody was a part of it, but everybody is looking at at DeAndre like he wasn't supposed to feel that as well. But I think he's a more than capable running back. The situation that you brought up is more relevant than what he did last year in terms of having been with Coach Johnson before and them choosing to go in a different direction, ultimately sending them off to Philly. So I think that's more relevant than looking at what happened last year. But I think that having Coach Bieniemy in there, and I think, just not being able to get some of the guys they maybe had targeted earlier in the process leaves them with what they have, and I think they feel good enough about it, especially considering the upgrades at offensive line. So I'm more inclined to believe that they'll enter the regular season with this particular group, and I think DeAndre Swift will be fine. They're hopeful on Roschon Johnson. They're hopeful on Kyle Monangai. We'll have to see how that actually comes together.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at any early mock draft, literally every mock draft has the Bears taking Love from Notre Dame next year in the first round. So I think a lot of people think that there's going to be adjustments to that running back room eventually if it's not this year. Let me ask you one more on the offense and then a couple on the defense before I let you go, because I haven't asked you about the pass catcher. So let's kind of lump tight end and wide receiver together. Sure. Obviously, there's the top 5 targets, but there's even interesting guys like Zacchaeus out there. What did you kind of see from these pass catchers? Are they all buying in? We have the no block, no rock mentality right there. I think that's kind of directed at TJ Moore a little bit. What do you think of this group and how the buy-in is going? And maybe if you've seen anything interesting out of them in the first few practices with Ben Johnson.
It's an extremely talented group. You got DJ Moore, you got Rome, like you said, you got all these guys, right? And they're extremely talented. And right now the buy-in is real. What I question about it, specifically talk about guys like DJ Moore, but all these guys that have been on the Bears roster for, a few years or more, they haven't been in a winning organization. They don't really know what a winning culture is, what winning ball is like. And I say that to say that while we're praising Coach Johnson for this intense, kind of in your face, correct every small detail mentality, which I do appreciate, but while we're praising that, how long does that last, right? There's a level of trust from the players to the coaches that has to be there to say, I trust that this method is going to get me to be the best version of myself, going to get this offense to be the best version of itself. And if that doesn't come along with wins, then how long does that trust go before it just says, okay, this isn't resulting in wins. It's not resulting in me getting the ball as much as I would like to. It's really just getting on my nerves at this point, because they don't know to say, hey, this is what winning ball looks like. This is what it takes. This is how the coaches are going to behave in a winning organization. So I feel good about it, but I do have a question about, is there an end to this runway where it says, okay, I'm kind of getting sick of this because I'm not seeing the results. If the results don't come quickly, how long did the buy-in continue? That being said, I love the group. I think they're extremely talented. I look at a guy like Olamide Zacchaeus, and I know, they drafted Burden, and you got Colson who's going to play inside as well. But I think they feel pretty good about the guys they have even right now. I asked Coach Johnson this one day last week just about how does he feel if those top 2 draft picks, when we talk about Burden and Loveland, how do you feel if they are not ready to go? Is there a certain particular point in training camp where you'll say, well, if they aren't back by this particular time, then it's probably going to be to their detriment in terms of figuring out what their roles are going to be and getting them acclimated in? He says, no concern at all. We got plenty of guys that we can go to. And I think watching how Olamide Zaccheaus has moved around the field in the slot, how he catches the ball, how he runs after the catch, I think they feel pretty good about the group of guys they have. I think they're looking forward to, continuing to unlock Cole Kmet. Bit of a down year for him last year, but we've seen him have, 7 touchdowns in the past. So those types of things, I think they feel really, really good about continuing to develop Rome Odunze. I think they have to just go with that particular group. You got Devin Duvernay in there as well, who hasn't been as much of a productive receiver as he has a kick returner, but he is a veteran guy who you could use if you need him to. And then I think those 2 young guys would kind of just be, icing on the cake if they can come in, get healthy, get acclimated, and then be productive. So I think they feel really, really good about the group. I think they're buying in right now. And if they can have early production, then that buy-in will continue, and they should be very, very productive.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. So let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball. I know fans want to talk offense, but we got to talk a little defense here before I let you go.
Got to.
Let's start with the defensive line. I think this is going to be an interesting line. It looks like, to me that they're starting to develop a little more depth. But I do think it's also interesting that if Turner's going to be more inside, that you could see kind of needing some more depth on the edge. That would make Austin Booker kind of the third edge there. I don't know if they're going to be comfortable with that yet. So what have you seen with the defensive line to this point with Dexter, with Pickens? I mean, I know I've heard, Dominic Robinson's looking good again. I saw that last spring too. I'm not buying it until I see it with pads on with Dom Rob, right, unfortunately. But where are you at with this defensive line? What did you see that stood out to you?
Yeah, I like the depth in the interior, right? So if you're going to start with Big Bill and Grady Jarrett, and then you've got Dexter and Shamar behind them, and they've got some other guys they like behind them, Brandon Williams and some others, I think there's good depth on the interior of that defensive line. I'm with you in terms of the questions on the edge. First of all, you got to get a bounce back year from Montez. We know he dealt with some things last year in terms of injury, played through him, but the production wasn't there. The game-changing plays were not there. They need him to play at an elite level if that defensive line is going to be what they hope they can be. They paid Dayo Odangbo good bit of money to come over here and hopefully turn those pressures and hurries into sacks to be able to finish some of those plays. He had a ton of pressures and hurries, not a ton of sacks. He's got to be able to convert those. And hopefully the idea is you put him on an offensive line that has Montez, that has Grady Jarrett, then he should be able to get there just a half a second earlier to be able to finish those plays and actually get those sacks. He's also a versatile guy that you can move up and down the defensive line as you see fit. We know Coach Allen likes to do that. Dennis Allen, the defensive coordinator, likes to do that with some of his defensive linemen. Odangbo's a really big guy. I didn't realize how big he was. He's a massive dude who can certainly kick inside. We saw him have a lot of production from there in Indy. So that's a piece they're hopeful on, optimistic about. They're certainly betting on it financially. Hopefully he can be that guy for them. And then you start to look at, like you said, Austin Booker. Can he take that next step, which would be a significant step just to come in and be, that third down pass rusher that they can depend on to add to their pass rush consistently. You look at him, and I think he came out, some people said he came out a year early. Ultimately, what the Bears spent on him was a 2025 fourth-round pick to go ahead and get him. Now, they did it last year and got him for a fifth or whatever, but ultimately what they spent was a 2025 fourth-round pick on him to get him a year earlier. And some people say now if he came out in 2025, maybe he's a second-round pick, maybe even a little bit higher than that. But if you look at what actually happened, I think essentially he spent a redshirt year kind of as a rookie. And I think if you're going to have a redshirt year, would you rather him do that at the NFL level or just play another year at Kansas? So I think having developed should help him a little bit there. And maybe he can come in and be that guy. But I'm with you. There's concerns, right? You're going to have to see it. I like Dominique Robinson as a freakish athlete, but like you said, it's shorts and T-shirts, right? Anytime you're in shorts and T-shirts, Dominique Robinson is going to look like one of the best players on the field because he is that kind of freakish athlete. You talk about size, speed, athleticism combination. He's that type of guy. Saw some of the same things, and I don't know if we're going to get to linebackers or what, but we saw some of the same things from Hippolyte going through this kind of spring process where you're like, that dude is a freakish athlete. You see the speed on display. You want to see what that looks like when he gets the pads on. Can he translate that, into taking on blocks full speed, filling those gaps, making those tackles? But the speed, the athleticism certainly on display. Those two kind of jumped out at you. But again, that's shorts and T-shirts from two really, really good athletes. But the defensive line feel really good about the interior. Questions about what's happening at the edge, and you're kind of hopeful that Odangbo, number one, can be the guy that you hope he can be, but also that Booker can take another step. And then maybe, however they feel about it, maybe influences what they do in that last phase of player acquisition, right after cut downs or whatever, to see maybe we can come in and bring in a veteran guy that we feel decent enough about that can maybe add, 3.5, 4 sacks to our pass rush this year.
Yeah, all fair. Yeah, I do want to ask you a quick one on the linebacker, a quick one on the secondary before I let you go. So with linebacker, obviously, and I know nickel is the new base, but Edwards and Edmonds we know are going to be out there for the bulk. But who is the third linebacker right now? Is it Hippolyte? Is it Sewell? Because obviously I know Sanborn was a fan favorite, and obviously he's in Dallas now. So how does this linebacker group shake out here beyond Edmonds and Edwards?
Yeah, I know that, the Bears were not in on bringing Jack Sanborn back. I don't think that was the right call, honestly. It didn't cost a ton for him to end up in Dallas. I thought he was very, very productive every time he was on the field, plays with great instincts. I know the 40 time is whatever it is, but he plays much faster because of his instincts, and he arrives with violence, and he's a consistent tackler. Plus, he's a four-phase special teamer. So anyway, that's dead and gone. What Coach Allen said was that they wanted to improve the team's speed, especially at that position. They certainly did that, bringing in Hippolyte. This kid is blazing speed. I saw him carry DeAndre Swift on a wheel route down the sideline perfectly. Mirrored him out to the sideline and to the flat, opened his hips, turned and ran with him, found the ball, got a nice PBU, no pass interference or anything like that was involved in the play. And so you see the athleticism that he certainly has. You see his ability to shoot the gaps when they ask him to blitz. He has certainly that kind of speed. We'll be very, very interested to see what happens when the pads come on. If one, can he maintain the speed, which I think he will, but can he deal with the physicality? He's a little undersized. Can he deal with the physicality, or is he a liability in the run game, or, just in terms of trying to body up some of these tight ends, even in the short passing game? And so that'll be interesting to see. If he can handle that, though, Bill, I think he's probably the guy that has pole position in terms of getting that spot. I know the Bears have liked Noah Sewell. He's not the athlete that Hippolyte is, and he'll have to win this pure physicality. He'll have to be a sure tackler. He'll have to fill those gaps in the run game and continue to flash throughout training camp and into the preseason. And Hippolyte will have to struggle with those things. If I had to bet on it right now, assuming Hippolyte can hold up enough when the pads come on, I would say it's probably his job to lose early, right? But I think they still feel pretty good about Noah Sewell as well. He's just not the athlete. There were a couple times in one of the latest practices where he got beat by a couple of the tight ends for a big gain, a touchdown, a first down, and he just doesn't have that type of athleticism out in space that Hippolyte does. And so if Coach Allen is looking for the athleticism and the speed, Hippolyte is the guy, but I don't think you want to sacrifice too much physicality. So I think those are the two guys for sure. If Hippolyte can bring the pads, I think it'll be his spot.
All right, and let me ask you about the secondary here, because obviously, Kyler Gordon gets his extension. Jalen, everyone's happy with there. Brisker obviously needs to be able to avoid concussions and stay on the field. They know what they have with Byard. But I want to ask you about Tyreek Stevenson, because we know the roller coaster that it was 2024 with him. We don't need to get into everything. It was an adventure. But where do you think this coaching staff is with him? Where do you think he is in terms of understanding what he needs to do to buy in and be the player that I think a lot of Bears fans, and I think the coaching staff, thinks he can be if he gets everything square and does what he needs to do on the field?
I think his mentality is in the right place. We heard him speak last week. He sounded very mature. He understood the roller coaster that you spoke about and how he needed to be better in terms of dealing with that. He said he didn't have any, big come to Jesus moment with any of the coaching staff. He said he wasn't necessary. He knows what he needs to do going forward, and we'll see what that looks like. In terms of him being a fit in this defense, I think the coaches feel good about it. I think he feels good about it. They want to run press man. He's a big physical corner. He's got long arms. He wants to come up, get his hands on you, and kind of carry you through the route. And I think that part of it fits. There's a concern for me, though, when you talk about press man, that if you cannot marry the pass rush with that coverage, you're going to leave him susceptible to big plays. He is not a guy that I personally want carrying guys 40, 50 yards down the field. I remember them being in Washington and sitting in the press box last year, and the Commanders had the ball, and they were coming. That press box in Washington is in the end zone, in the corner of the end zone. The offense was coming right at us, and as they broke the huddle, and I started to look around and evaluate what coverage they were in and what the offense was looking to do, and I said, oh my God. I said, you got Tyreek one-on-one with Terry McLaurin, and that is not ideal, right? It's not ideal. And certainly they snapped the ball, boom, deep down the left sideline,
I
picks
remember the
up the
play.
huge play. Yeah, picks up the huge play. And I think it was Kevin Fishbane that was next to me. I was like, this is not good that he's one-on-one with him. And certainly they took advantage of it. So I think Tyreek is more suited to get his hands on guys. I think he's more suited for some of those big physical receivers that he can kind of get his hands on and then turn and run with. I don't like him against some of those quick twitch, faster guys, especially on either deep routes or drag routes across the field. If they got 40 yards and he's got to trail them across the field, I don't like that. And so you got to be able to get some pass rush that helps him in that situation. If they can force him to get the ball out 2.5, 3 seconds max, he'll be fine. But if the play starts to get 4.5, 5 seconds, I'm concerned. That's obviously concerned about any DB, but I'm more concerned about what that looks like for Tyreek, certainly than Jalen or some of the other corners. I like Tyreek's game a lot. He's got long arms. He can probably scratch his knees standing up. I love his physicality. I love his confidence. He's a competitor. He's going to take chances on the ball. And I think he will be productive. I think he'll get his hands on some footballs this year, maybe 5 or 6, but I also think he may give up an equal amount of big plays if those plays are allowed to drag on. So I think they feel good about it. I feel good about it. There is some concern. They're going to have a significant pass rush to impact the quarterback enough to not have Tyreek in man coverage deep down the field or all the way across on drags against some of the faster receivers on their schedule.
Gotcha. All right. Last one for you here before we let Herb go. Just want to kind of get where you think this Bears team stacks up in the NFC North, because I think there's some interesting things. The Vikings, obviously switching to a rookie quarterback. I know KOC is the quarterback whisperer, but you got to wonder if they're going to regress a little bit there. Detroit lost 8 coaches, including both their coordinators off their staff. We'll see how much magic Dan Campbell still has there. Green Bay Packers, of course, Jair Alexander just got released, so they've got, an interesting secondary there in Green Bay. Where are you at with the Bears? What kind of impact do you think Ben Johnson can have on this division in Chicago? Can they push for a division championship? Is that too early? Is it playoffs? Is it just they only won 5 games? If they win 8, that should be a success. Where are you at with the Bears and in this what's going to be a difficult division?
It's going to be a difficult division. It's going to be a competitive division. I think these teams are pretty evenly matched up with each other. I think even look back at last year, the Bears had an opportunity to beat the Packers twice, had an opportunity to beat the Lions. Like, these aren't teams that the Bears are afraid to go in and compete against. Like you said, the Lions lost a ton of infrastructure. I don't think that's something that can be, overstated. I don't think you can just look at that and say, oh, they'll be fine. They are the team to beat. And, you give them the respect until you go ahead and beat them. But that's a lot to lose. They lose, their center who's been an anchor for them for quite some time. And so that's also going to be something that they have to deal with as they go through their process of training camp and preseason. So they certainly took some hits. We'll see if they can kind of maintain, their grip on the division. But I'm with you on the piece about having J.J. McCarthy come in. When he arrives at Soldier Field, a bit of a homecoming Chicago area kid, he's going to be making his first start. He's going to be playing his first NFL game, Monday Night Football, on the road, hostile environment, homecoming. You got Coach Dennis Allen, a veteran DC who likes to confuse quarterbacks, likes to bring exotic pressures and show you different looks that you aren't necessarily prepared for. I think the Bears should be able to get their hands on the football from him at least twice, and then you can go out and come out with a win, and you already have one win over the Vikings early. And so I think that the Bears can certainly be competitive. I think they got to take care of business at home in the division and for the totality of their schedule, if I'm being honest with you. I don't know that I would say that I think they can win the division. I don't think that they can't. I think the Bears will be somewhere around 9-8, and so I don't think that wins the division, but I think they can certainly go 3-3. I think it wouldn't surprise me if this entire division went 3-3 in the division. I think it's that close and that competitive. I think the Bears have as good an opportunity as anybody else, but they're talking about going worst to first. So, I don't want to be overly optimistic about where they are. I would still give the Lions their due respect. And then to say the Bears, you got to go out there and beat Green Bay again. You got to deal with the Vikings. I think they have a chance. I wouldn't put them at the top, but I'd say, they've got a fighting chance as good as anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. So there he is at Herb Howard 411 on Twitter/X. And of course, Bears beat writer for the Bigs. You can catch all his work there. Herb, thanks for so much time. It was a great interview. OTAs and minicamp certainly were interesting. And we look forward to training camp and all your coverage there.
Real football is coming, Bill. Thanks so much for having me, man. I appreciate it.
All right, there he is, Herb Howard, everybody. Herb gave you everything. If you wanted to know what was going on at OTAs, Herb gave you everything you needed to know there, some of his opinions as well. Herb's always great, so make sure you give him a follow at Herb Howard 411. Plenty of good stuff with the bigs over there as well. I know he does some videos with Nicholas Moriano, so you can check out his stuff there on YouTube as well. But yeah, thank you for Herb for coming aboard. Let's get to the mailbag and let's kick it off with, how about this? Lester A. Wiltfong Jr., who says, what are your expectations for Rome Odunze in year 2? That's a good question, Lester. I don't know if I've quite honed in my exact expectations because I'm curious about how much the ball is actually going to be spread around. Because if Colson Loveland is good right out of the gate, if Luther Burden is good right out of the gate, that gives them 5 legitimate targets. And let's let you just kind of play this out. How many, if everything works out well with Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson, how many yards does Caleb Williams throw to, right? 4,500 tops, right? Probably a little over 4,000, 4,200. Bears have never had a 4,000 yard receiver. That would certainly be a huge, that'd be, the greatest passing season in Bears history. So if you're looking at 4,000 yards and let's call it 500 of those yards are going to go to Zacchaeus and Devin Duvernay and the running backs and Durham Smythe and all that stuff. Right now, suddenly you're already down. You got 3,500 yards and you got those 5 targets. Average it out, that's 700 yards a person. Now, obviously, I think Cole Kmet's going to have a little less. I think Colston Loveland's going to have a little less. But I don't think we're going to see a wide receiver here that has 1,400 yards receiving. I think we're going to see the ball get moved around quite a bit. I would be surprised unless DJ Moore does not buy into Ben Johnson and no block, no rock and mentality and all that stuff. If DJ Moore doesn't buy in, then we may see some different things with DJ Moore and maybe not being as much as the primary guy, and maybe DJ Moore is not here in 2026. But assuming DJ Moore buys in, then I think we're seeing Rome Odunze settle in for this season as the team's number 2 guy for pass catches. I think he'll be number 2 in targets. I think he'll be number 2 in receptions. I do think we will see a higher catch rate from him this year. I think we'll see a higher success rate from him this year, but I don't know if we're going to see 1,000 yards, right? I don't know if Rome's going to get to that 1,000 yard mark. I'd love to see it, but if Rome Odunze has a better year this year, based on last year, as a rookie, he has 54 catches, 734 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, what's also interesting is his catch rate was only 53%, and his success rate was only 45%. So if his success rate goes above 50% and his catch rate goes above 60-some percent, then maybe he doesn't have more targets. He had 101 targets last year. Maybe the targets don't really increase at all, but he catches 65 of those targets and ends up with, 900, 950 yards receiving. So to me, I have good expectations that Rome improves and shows that he's a very good player, but I don't have the expectations for a breakout season. All right, Ozzy Traps wants to know, what is the probability the Bears look to add a veteran IOL as a depth backup player? Who would be some good candidates that you see as the best fit? Honestly, at this point, good candidates really aren't there. We're going to have to see if the Bears add a depth piece on the interior, which I agree with you, Ozzy. I would like to see it happen because, as I mentioned previously in this podcast, and I mentioned it to Herb, and you can tell Herb doesn't trust it either. I don't trust this IOL depth. I think it's one of the weakest spots on the team in terms of depth at any position. Any position, their IOL depth might be the worst, and that's not good. So who is not going to be on the roster, who's going to be one of those cuts that maybe the Bears can add a 6th offensive lineman with cuts late August, early September. But as of right now, there's not a guy I would sit there and be like, that's the guy they need to sign. Obviously most of the other guys have been picked up at this point. Slim pickings out there at this point. Plus, I'm sure they're going to want to see some of their guys. Does Ken Ryan Bates get on the field? Does Ricky Stromberg improve? Does Doug Kramer improve? Do they try Karan Amagaji inside? They probably want to fiddle with what they have and see what they can get out of these guys before they decide to add a veteran piece. Dan Olson. Other than the QB position, if the top projected starter at each position group had a season-ending injury, how would you rank the top 5 worst positions? All right. So you're asking about depth, I assume. So what would be the worst positions? Well, guard, center, right there. We'll lump that as one position. Interior offensive line, that's the worst. Running back without DeAndre Swift, they don't really have an explosive guy. They've got in between the tackle guys. That's going to be a problem. Tight end, they're okay. Wide receiver, they're okay. Defensive tackle, they're okay. Linebacker, there's not a lot of depth there. I think even though I don't love Tremaine Edwards, and I think TJ Edwards might be on the downside, I think there might be an issue there. Edge, absolutely, because that means Austin Booker is starting and you've got no depth behind him. And then probably safety. Now, you didn't say kicker and punter. There is no depth there. We're going to ignore those. So safety, linebacker, edge, interior offensive line, and running back. Those would be the 5 worst possessions. Johnny Ringo, how much of a draft success is talent evaluation and how much is player development? For example, Zach Pickens, bad talent eval by the front office or bad development by the coaching staff? Seems most blame the GM for a bad pick and not the coach bad enough to be fired. Okay. I mean, look, I don't think there's a lot of gray area here. I think that's the bottom line is you need coaches who develop players, but you also need GMs to make the right assessment. For example, Velus Jones. There wasn't anything that Matt Eberflus and his staff could have done. That he just wasn't it. This was a guy, excuse me, this was a guy who did nothing in college, broke out when he was like 25 playing up against 19-year-olds, and then went to the NFL. He had no business being in the NFL. I first guessed that one upon the pick. I said, that's a bad pick. He's not going to turn out to be anything. I didn't think he'd be this bad, but Velus Jones, that is on the GM. Other guys like Zach Pickens, you sit there and say, well, is that the coach's fault? Because Javon Dexter's developing. So if Matt Eberflus's coaching staff was able to develop Javon Dexter and not develop Zach Pickens, to me, that would mean it could be a Pickens issue. But at the same time, I also don't think the coaching staff was using Zach Pickens correctly. Now, I think the ship has sailed with Zach Pickens. I'm not buying it there. But I think, it's not a cop-out answer. It's a little of column A. It's a little of column B. I thought Ryan Pace did a great job finding day 3 guys that developed into quality players. Adrian Amos, Jordan Howard, Eddie Jackson, Tariq Cohen. There were plenty of these guys that he grabbed, DeAndre Houston Carson, plenty of these guys who became key contributors for the team. Was that because the coaching staff, whether, Matt Nagy's coaching staff was that good and these guys were getting developed? Or does that mean that they had an eye for talent back there? Because when you sit there and say, well, the coaches did a great job developing those guys. Well, a lot of the second round picks and the third round picks, they didn't go anywhere. So if we say the coaching staff is developing some players and not other players, then at some point you have to sit there and say, well, some guys have to be that the GM made a poor evaluation. All right, Billy Kidd. Now that Nick Chubb, who was rumored to possibly be a Bear, has signed with Houston, does this mean the Bears are happy to go into the season with their current running back room? I wouldn't call it happy, Billy. I think it was very clear they tried to upgrade the position group. And I think when we get into training camp and kind of see, and this coaching staff can really see where this running back room is, they still might want to add a guy. Because if you can add a Kenneth Walker for a conditional 6th-round pick, again, as I mentioned, what they got for Jordan Howard when they trade him to Philadelphia, he's only got 1 year left on his deal. Maybe they want to do that and try and upgrade their room a little bit. I don't know. I can't get inside the head here. What I would say is that this running back room is not good, right? You could sit there and be like, oh, Swift is fine. You can be a rah-rah Bears fan all you want. And maybe they can get enough out of this running back room this year, but it's not a good running back room. It's one of the worst running back rooms in the league. I haven't ranked it. I don't know if they're 27th or 19th, but there's no way in hell they're in the top half of the league. And I would assume they're somewhere in the 20s. It's not a good running back room. I mean, look, is it 30, 31, 32? It's possible. I mean, I don't think DeAndre Swift has any business being a top running back in this league. So, I don't think it's a great running back room. If they can add to it, I think maybe they will. But again, do they want to give up draft capital to do so? They tried to do it in the draft. They couldn't do it. They had to wait until Monangai late in the draft. So we'll see where they go with this, Billy. But happy? No. But is what it is? Maybe. Evan Lepeau, please give me your uncensored opinion on all these dated retired numbers. Luther Burden is 87. Yuck. Is there some way the Bears can honor these NFL pioneers and allow these retired numbers to be used? Evan, there's absolutely a conversation to be had here. I know Jeff Berkus and Lester have talked about this a lot. I know they've done some of it on the podcast as well. There's been articles on Windy City Gridiron about it. Yes, there is a way to do this, especially with the new stadium, creating some sort of ring of honor for these guys. But how long do you need to have a player's number retired? 50 years? I mean, that's a hell of a nod. Maybe there's a way to do temporary retired numbers and permanent retired numbers. Right now, who needs to be permanent retired numbers? I'd keep George Halas's number retired. I know he wasn't a good player, but it's George Halas. And yes, he's got the GSH on the sleeve. But if you kept, I think it's 7. If you kept 7 retired for George Halas, that makes a lot of sense to me. You want to keep 34 retired? I'm all for it. Other than that, I can make an argument that 51 should stay retired. You can make an argument even for, a guy like Sid Luckman to keep his number retired. But bottom line for me is if they kept 7 and 34 retired and unretired basically all the other numbers, I'd be okay with it. Because Evan, here's the other problem. You're talking about the retired numbers like Nagurski and these guys from way back when. But at the same time, there's a ton of players that deserve jersey retirements that they skipped. They haven't retired a number in ages because they were running out of numbers. So the 85 Bears, Peyton is the only number retired. They did Butkus, they did Ditka, they did Gale Sears, and then they kind of said, all right, that's it, we're done. Dan Hampton, Steve McMichael, Mike Singletary, Jimbo Covert. These are guys that Richard Dent, these are guys that should have their numbers retired. But they're not even in the conversation because of everything that has happened with not having enough numbers. So I absolutely would figure out a way, create a ring of honor, maybe create a patch that stays on that player's jersey forever. So if you are going to unretire, 51, if you're going to have Dick Butkus's number retired for X number of years, and then you unretire Dick Butkus's number and someone wants to wear 51, there is a patch on there that recognizes Dick Butkus in some capacity. I don't know where, somewhere up by the shoulder pads. I don't know. There are a lot of different ways to do it, Evan, and they absolutely should consider a way to do this better than they have. Because what they've done is they've honored everyone from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, a little bit from the 60s, and 1980, and Brian Urlacher, he's never getting his number retired. Peanut Tillman, these guys are not getting their numbers retired because there's just no numbers. So you need to figure out a way to get some of these numbers freed up so you can honor the guys that have been ignored and then still free up some of the numbers moving forward for the next generation. Joe Barzak, do you see the Bears making a training camp add to the rotation at defensive end, or are you buying Dom Robinson? I can give the benefit of the doubt that Austin Booker can take a second-year step with adding some weight and having experience, with skeptical on Dom Rob. Joe, I have no faith in Dom Rob. I've said it a couple times on this podcast. There's no reason to believe in him. He's shown nothing in the years he's been in the league. Like I said, one good game against the Niners, his debut in the rain, where it was kind of a weird day. Anything else, he's bad. He is a bad football player. He may be a great athlete. Herb's talking about, you're going to see him dominate in shorts because he's a great athlete. Once the pads come on, he is a bad football player. So unless they see big strides from Austin Booker, where they're like, he is definitely our third edge, and we'll deal with Hardy or whatever as the fourth edge, okay, fine. But if you don't see huge strides from Booker in training camp, then I do think it would make sense for the Chicago Bears to add someone. Joe's got a second question here. Can Brisker be a long-term factor on this roster? Joe, I have my doubts. I mean, Brisker, I think, to really be any consideration here, has got to play 17 games and has got to be at a Pro Bowl level. Because other than that, I just don't see what the risk is with this many concussions. If he has any kind of injury this year, then I think there's no chance the Bears can consider him at this point. It's unfortunate. He was definitely making strides last year before this concussion, but I mean, this is a concussion that kept him out for 12 games? That's a little scary. You know, you're getting into Tua area there with that kind of concussion situation. All throws lead to Rome. Cover the crisis at running back. I don't think it's a crisis. I just don't think it's a good situation. If it was up to me, I would add Kenneth Walker and see where that gets me. I'm not a big believer in Swift. I think Swift is fine in a secondary role. I do not like him in a primary role. I hope Roshan Johnson can kind of have a Jamal Williams type year. We'll see if Kyle Monangai can push there. No, I'm not an Ian Wheeler guy. Maybe he's got something. It's just, maybe there's a little something there, but nothing where he's going to be a key contributor. So yeah, I don't think it's a crisis, but at the same time, I do think the Bears at least have to consider adding to that room. And maybe they don't have to add to the room. Maybe they start off 3-1 and they realize their running back room is bad, and they add a running back before the trade deadline. There are other options they can do without just saying, oh, we got to add a running back before training camp starts. Michael Rowland, given the gift choice here, what is your all-time favorite Muppet not named Ralph? So on my mailbag request, if you didn't see it, I put out the Swedish Chef as my gift there to encourage people to call in, or I'm sorry, to write in questions. All right, so Muppet. All right, well, Swedish Chef is up there. I'm a big fan of the Swedish Chef. A lot of this, honestly, I love some of the pairings and I love the interactions. Stadler and Waldorf, I love the old guys up in the movie theater. They crack me up. Gonzo and Rizzo, those interactions, those crack me up. Bunsen and Beaker, those interactions crack me up. The band, I don't remember the name of the band, but the band with Animal and everyone there, the band cracks me up. So to me, it's not so much one individual. Miss Piggy kind of annoyed me. Fozzie I liked when I was a little kid, but not so much now. I agree. Rolf's great. Kermit's Kermit. So to me, I guess it's a little bit of a cop-out. I guess if I had to say one singular guy, I do love the Swedish Chef. That's always an entertaining one. But I would probably go with Stadler and Waldorf. I think that would be my favorite of the Muppet characters. All right. That's going to do it for Bears Banter. So we are going to take a couple weeks off. Unless the Bears make some huge news, we are going to take a few weeks off here. It's June. The off-season program is in the books. So we'll take a little time off. We will be back in July. We will do our 2-part mega training camp preview that I always used to do with Robert Schmitz, but we will respect Robert's retirement and we will pivot. I think you'll like the person we have lined up there, someone who's very plugged in around the Bears organization and is at Hallis Hall regularly. He is scheduled to be part of that preview that we'll have. Again, that'll be a 2-part one that should be out, get us through July 4th. Then you'll see part 1 and part 2 released about a week apart. And we will do that. And then, of course, training camp will be here and we will be talking Bears football. So enjoy your summers. We'll talk to you in a few weeks. Bear down, everybody. Talk to you soon. Adios.